Okay, so welcome to anyone who is watching our recording. This is our discussion here at Thomas Jefferson Unitarian Church about the Unitarian Universalist Association study action issue on democracy. I'm Reverend Jeff Liebman, and we have some of our other folks here. And if anyone joins by Zoom later, we'll have them on too. We're doing this recording so that anyone who couldn't be here today can watch and later provide any comments or participate if they would choose to. This process is one that is has been developed over several decades by the Unitarian Universalist Association, and everything is run by the Commission on Social Witness, which is a committee of 5 Unitarians who are elected to the position. If I can get this one. No, I didn't look at that. Zoom doesn't give you a lot of room here. Let's see. Get rid of that. Up into that one. No. So there's the Commission on Social Witness. It's a board of 5 lay people who are committed to managing this process and ensuring that its facilitation at General Assemblies occurs with the most democratic involvement as possible, which is obviously appropriate for our denomination. These are the members right now. I happen to know Richard Bach. He's from the Shelter Rock congregation in New York. Extremely dedicated social justice person in our congregations. So if you ever have any interest in looking up more about this, you can go to this website, which is off the UUA's main webpage. And then another thing that you'll find on this webpage is a link to all the social justice statements that have ever been approved at General Assemblies since 1961. And you can search them by title keyword, text keyword. So if you want to look up something like, anything we've ever said on abortion, let's say, you can just do that, click it, and you find here it goes from most recent to the oldest. So this was our statement of conscience that was written in 2015 on reproductive justice, but it goes all the way back to 1963, long before Roe v. Wade, when the Unitarian Universalist Association supported the woman's right to choose. So you can go search that anytime. There's a ton of statements there on all kinds of topics. Now, the process itself has changed a lot over the years. It used to be far simpler. You used to be able to, basically within a year, a congregation could propose a statement, get it to the next General Assembly, and get it approved. And there's still some remnants of that in that there are 2 kinds of statements. There are these social action issue statements, these statements of conscience, and then there are still actions of immediate witness that can happen right away because there's something imminent that has just happened that the UUA needs to respond to right away. But they usually only do maybe 2 or 3 of those at a General Assembly. Most of them follow this process, which is now a 4-year process. So if you look at the democracy one that we're talking about right now, we are actually right here in this phase of the statement of conscience has already been drafted, and they're now soliciting comments from congregations, and these comments are due on February 1st. Then once all those comments are melded into the draft statement, then it will go to General Assembly in June in Portland, Oregon, and be voted on or voted up or down. And then once it's voted on, let's say, and approved, then the last year will be the rollout to churches of here are the things we should be doing now because we have passed the statement. But the whole process actually began for this statement of conscience back in 2015, when it was proposed and selected at General Assembly as the next study action issue. And so there was a study guide that was put out, and if anyone wants to look at that, if you go to the Commission on Social Witness page, you'll see that there's a study guide that has a half-hour video and some other links of supplemental readings and all kinds of things that you would normally do in that first year after the approval. And then that whole process takes 2 years of back and forthing and coming up with drafts and all of that. Now, last year would have been the year that the second statement of conscience would have been proposed and selected. And to be honest, I don't even remember what it was, but that's something you could look up too. So that this year should also be the year that we're talking about that study action issue in much broader, not looking at meticulously line by line, but just sort of what should be in it. So that's pretty much all of that. Then the other thing that I would put in here for our discussions is, we Unitarian Universalists love to have covenants. And this is the covenant the Commission on Social Witness uses, which is a little different than typical ones in that, we're dealing with what can usually be very hot button items that can really bring out, the fighter in all of us. So things like, the third one, being honest and open about our personal biases, which is, something that can really impact our social justice views. Trusting each other's good intentions, affirming different learning and lifestyles, all those kinds of things you might typically see in a covenant statement. But probably the most important one is just this, finding the holy within each of us, and that's, gets back to this notion that this is faith work. The introduction to the study action issued guide, talks about how we're challenging ourselves to reconsider how we understand, participate, and engage in democratic living. It is a call to envision our role as a faith community to promote a societal ethos that affirms dignity for all, takes responsibility for the human role in ecological disaster, and an openness to rethink our use of political power and production of wealth. So, for us as Unitarian Universalists, this is a very, this is an issue of faith. This is an issue of our religion. So, the task for today is to look at the draft statement. I have copies here if you all don't have one. They very nicely provide a draft with line numbers. So when you submit the form, and this is the form that you send into the UUA. I don't have it, I can show it online, but it's a form that basically asks for who's the congregation, who's submitting it. But the basic 3 questions are: what are the strengths of the statement? What are the weaknesses or omissions? And what specific changes in wording do you suggest? So those are the things they're asking for right now. And, as participants in our democratic process, we are free to do that, and we're invited to do that. So I will begin with a short chalice lighting and then open it to the floor. Since this is Martin Luther King's day, I figured I'd use a quote of his. Whatever we do, we must keep God in the forefront. Let us be Christian in all our actions. But I want to tell you this evening that it is not enough for us to talk about love. Love is one of the pivotal points of the Christian faith. There is another side called justice, and justice is really love in calculation. Justice is love correcting that which revolts against love. So, I will now open the floor to you all. And you can all introduce yourselves for anyone who's watching later.
I'm Bernie Nathardov. And I'm Dennis Naiman.
Joe Brennan.
Where is the microphone?
It's in the camera.
Can I pick this up?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I tested it the other day. If someone were to come on, they come across loud and clear.
Line by line copy here. According to your introductory comments, Jeff, this church and others would need to reply by the 1st of February, right, to this current statement.
And then when the time comes in at General Assembly, delegates of this congregation could also, they'll bring it to the plenary, and there'll be a yay and a nay microphone, and if there's still something that is unresolved, people can go to the microphone, and these get altered at General Assembly. I believe it was the first one that went through this process that was the peacekeeping one. And there was a very strong vocal minority, including me, that wanted that statement to say we were a peace church. And we eventually got the plenary session to vote down that draft by 9 votes. It was like 550 to 541 or something like that. And it went through another whole year. They eventually never included the peace church clause, but it was enough to at least make people have the debate.
Yeah.
You know, is that something we want to do? And I think most people were still feeling that there were humanitarian reasons for military engagement.
Mm-hmm.
So we do not join the Brethren and the Friends and the Quakers and Church of the Brethren and the Mennonites, who are all peace churches.
Well, thanks for that. I was influenced by the Society of Friends as a young man, and still consider that a worthwhile cause to support financially the legislative efforts.
Yeah, this whole, one of the key words, and I know you mentioned the word of intersectionality. We used to have a different phrase for it years back in social work. But that the congregation, how do you see us of having worked in isolation, and what cross boundaries are and face us? Probably I'm talking about this stuff, TJ, more than anything else, but it's still, that might be an unfair question to ask you, but yeah.
Well, I mean, and again, for anyone who's listening, I'm the interim minister here, so in a sense, I still speak for the church as a prophetic voice, but I don't speak as a permanent voice for the church. So in one sense, I'll answer that question speaking for me. I think one of the big things, especially when we're talking intersectionality, is the name of the church. And it's something that comes up in all of the documentation for this, that we have never lived in a true democracy in this country. And part of that is because of our racial history. And of course, one would still argue from the point of view of African Americans and Latinx Americans and others that they still don't have all the same freedoms that white Americans are born with. The attacks on voting rights in the last few years have been appalling and have almost always universally been targeted against African American communities. So I think one of the things that this congregation could do just internally, and I know I've been told this discussion has been had in the past, but I don't know how big the discussion was. We're one of, I believe, 3 churches left in the denomination that still call themselves Thomas Jefferson. We know that the region on the East Coast that included Virginia and some other states actually changed their name from the Thomas Jefferson district to something like Central Eastern or something like that, or Southern, I forget what it was, because they came to that conclusion that even though Jefferson is was an amazing historical figure and a father of our democracy and all of that, that it's problematic to people who have not shared our largesse of democracy for the past 200 plus years to ask them to be included into a community named after someone who felt that Negroes were 2/3 of a white person and that Native Americans were simply savage animals. They weren't even really on the human spectrum. And of course, his history with Sally Hemings and while it's always problematic to apply modern morals to a person who doesn't live by them, there still reaches a point where you have to say, wow, if I were a black person, how would I feel about that? And I have to think there'd be an ouch factor there. So I think that's something that we might want to consider is not necessarily whether we want to change our name, but what do we do about that? How do we use the name but still present to people that we do care, and we are active, and we support those ideals of Jefferson's that did support democracy the way we see it. But we also, challenge the things he said and did that do not.
In this day and time, I don't think we've had a very widespread discussion of our name and the impact it might have on people looking at us. So I would welcome that kind of discussion within our congregation. Especially, as you said, it doesn't necessarily mean we're thinking about changing the name. There's quite a bit of history with Thomas Jefferson as a name, but we could examine what that means to people that have felt the impact of slavery and racism today.
And you can even ask the simple question of, if we were to open a branch campus in West Louisville, would we still name it Thomas Jefferson? And if we did, would anyone show up? And I don't know. Maybe some people wouldn't even think about that. But I think those that are involved in surge and showing up for racial justice or Black Lives Matter movement, I think they would know and they would care. Even Macente and some of the other groups would be like, well, if they feel this way about blacks, then what do they really think about?
Yeah, your name really makes a difference. And then you've got, on top of that, you've got location and population and all this other stuff, which becomes maybe not an expressed separation, but it does become a kind of in some circles a separation.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, and sometimes we have never openly discussed the differences of the impact of differences of education, and differences of income and what have you. But it's kind of like that subterranean thing which never really comes afloat. But yet, while that isn't presented here, much less is it presented in other segments of the population. So if it's difficult for us to talk about it here, much less in an engaging manner, much less, it's even more difficult to discuss this in a setting outside of the physical surroundings of the church itself.
And if we look at the draft document, this is specifically discussed at the beginning of line 47, where it says, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the 19th Amendment, the Civil Rights legislation, even though we passed all of those, our laws and systems continue to protect privilege and maintain value gaps. White supremacist values and practices permeate America's 400-year history. Supremacist values continue today through policies that disproportionately lower voter participation among people of color, people with low income, youth, and other disadvantaged people. Such policies include denial of voting rights for felons and ex-felons. That was an issue I hadn't even thought about until it came up in Florida this year. And I guess I get it. It's like, hey, I've done my time. Why would I suspended my rights forever because, you know, I did something wrong and hey, voter ID requirements and cutbacks on earlier voting opportunities, and of course gerrymandering, and then a lot of this draft talks about the influence of money on politics, and all of that is also associated. So, you know, so one of our questions would be, you know, to answer your question, Joe, you know, does this go far enough? Does it say enough? You know, does there need to be something in addition to this language and its recommendations that come at the end? You know, for instance, like one of the first action that's listed as individuals is that we conduct a personal democracy audit, which I think is kind of an interesting way of phrasing it. Review our relationships with systems that perpetuate consolidation of wealth and power. And you know, again, as your interim, I think that would be a tremendous idea for this congregation to do. You know, this congregation is obviously very above average financially compared to most other churches in Louisville, which is not unusual. That's normal for our denomination, but I think the disparity might even be a little greater. So for us to wrestle with those issues of privilege and how power and wealth are connected, especially in a city like this one that is so obviously racially divided.
Well, what you're talking about is one of the most difficult things, both in social level and in a religious level. We call it examination of conscience, or forward the communist, the Marxist autocritica. It still comes back to the same thing: is that nobody wants to look themselves in the mirror and say, okay, how does this apply to that person over there? How does this apply to me?
Exactly.
Or even to admit that it might apply very, very directly to me.
And, you know, under the congregational actions, the first one is to do a congregational democracy audit that includes considerations of practices that continue to sustain white supremacy. You know, this is a conversation that many of our congregations have been having over recent years, and I know there was some discussion of that here. But again, there's so much education involved in this to get us past that first stage of white guilt and blaming and shaming stuff to, okay, yeah, this is the way we've been. Can we be different and be better? And you know, to me, you know, the obvious sign is how many people of color are members of the congregation. People vote with their feet. You know, and if they don't feel that this is an inclusive, you know, of course, demographic has a lot to do with it. You know, you live in an area that's predominantly white, but still, you know, if people want what you have, they'll come. They'll drive the few miles, and so you know, it would seem to me that a message is being sent out there, whether we like it or not, you know, directly or indirectly, that we still embrace some of these benefits of privilege. And how do we address? Do we want to address that? And how do we address it? And what's it going to take to address that in order to make any kind of a difference, if any?
Are we even aware that it might have to be addressed?
Right.
It's either basic or basic.
Yep.
Well, besides demographics, I mean, the other dynamic is that we don't offer God as much here as in black churches do.
Yeah.
That's true.
So relative to the well, I was, you know, the thing that strikes me the most here is that whole paragraph that's starting on line 56 about money and speech.
Mm-hmm.
Money and speech. That you know, money is speech, and corporations are people.
Yep.
Therefore, you know, some people can speak louder than others.
Yep.
It's just in the last few years, just been undermining our democracy. Well, when legislators have to spend an inordinate amount of time just campaigning to get donations, that does, to me, undermine the process. I wanted to mention, too, I was taken by the topic in the sermon yesterday, talking about some of the sins that even a Unitarian Universalist might own up to, even though we kind of shy away from the word sin. But the sin of omission, where we're talking about the number of people of color in our congregation. Are we guilty of omitting steps to reach out to other people by having an open exchange, for example, where we take the initiative to invite Reverend Crosby, a noted minister in St. Stephen's Church in Western Louisville, or we have satellite services where we request to offer a service in another church or location. That to me would be worthy of conversation as well.
Yeah, and it's this is a conversation, I've now been engaged in 4 or 5 congregations in the last 10, 12 years that have all danced around this issue without really knowing what to do. And the easy response, the response you always hear first is, well, most African Americans are AME, Zion, or Baptist, or Methodist, or whatever, and we don't offer that. And to a degree, that's correct. But then my follow-up to that would be, okay, so what is it really that we're not offering? And could we offer it without compromising our principles? Obviously, we're not going to start believing in the Trinity, okay? But can we still do the best we can to affirm people who do actually believe in God? That doesn't have to be the Trinity God or the Jewish God or Allah, but they believe in the concept of a God. And can we be open enough to welcome those people and have them feel like they're not being told they're wrong? And I think all of our churches have a problem with this. And the question really becomes, is that an identity you want to have or not? And if you don't, then here are the consequences of that. That there are going to be people that are not going to feel welcome here, that maybe would feel welcome. And what makes me think about this in particular is All Souls Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is our big, I believe it's still our biggest congregation. They've got like 2,500 members. Some years ago, 10 or 12 years ago, I forget, there was an African American church that split, and the one group that split away from the other church was more UU in flavor, but they still had a very different way of worship than the Tulsa church did. But Marlon Lavinar, who's the minister, welcomed them in, not only to just share the building, but to actually share together worship. And they had a fundamentally changed structure that welcomed both groups. I know since then that the minister of that group has moved on and formed his own church, and they've built their own building, but a lot of those people have stayed because the Tulsa church made some structural changes and some fundamental changes in the way they treated people and the way they worshiped that I think they felt didn't compromise who they were as Unitarian Universalists. But that's a tough conversation. That's a hard conversation to have.
Yeah, as the past pastor of a trilingual, tricultural church, where we had English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole, it's really a difficulty to get those because the ways of coming together, the ways of presentation, everything is very, very different. And it's very hard to get those. Not that people, again, are in opposition, those 3 groups, but it's just their style, their lifestyle, their way of expressing themselves is so very, very different. Yeah? But if people never meet, they will never know each other. Yeah,
Yep. Well, and like even just to your specific point, it'd be curious to see what would happen if we held a worship service on Sunday evenings in Spanish, and just basically did our normal service with some alteration, but just offered it and see. Like, are we going to have 300 people show up? No, but would we have 30? You know, do we have 50? And at what point does that really become like, well, that's really our mission too, is to reach out to everybody, you know, who might want to be part of this community. Now, is that the best way to spend our resources on? I don't know. But something like that, you know, and some churches do a taizé service. You know, it's this sort of Christian form of a very meditative service, but it really isn't about the theology. It's more about, there's no sermon. It's just poetry, song, meditation. You know, it's a very structurally different type of service. And even that would probably appeal to, you know, non-white straight male type of culture than what is currently. But Bernie's right, you know, in terms of, given our location, and I don't know what the public transportation system here is like. I know in some cities it's god-awful. No matter what we did, would we actually attract people who don't live in a 5-mile radius of this church? I don't know. You know, if one presumes that many of these people, you know, don't have access to their own car, or you know, don't necessarily have the freedom to come on a Sunday morning. If we did, let's say, an online service, you know, that could be done at any time of the week. You know, would it actually work? Would it even attract people? I don't know. I think until you do it, you just don't know.
Or if we were to rent out space from some of these churches, which have very small, not a large church, but no congregation and no income. Would that be another alternative as an entrance into?
Yep.
I think one of the barriers is, and this applies to any group, applies to young people, young adults, applies to gays, lesbians. They come here and they say, these people don't look like me. And they leave, you know, and it's hard to overcome that barrier.
Yep. Well, and you know, I know in my experience, you know, as Unitarian Universalists, we always love to find catchphrases. Radically inclusive is one you see sometimes, and I wish the hell we were radically inclusive. I think we're radically inclusive theologically, with some limitations. But generally speaking, I'd say yeah. But culturally, no, I don't think we're even close on that. And you're right, that applies to young people, because young people come in and they see old people worship. You know, if you're gay and lesbian, they don't hear the gay and lesbian voices necessarily. They hear, you know, and this is something I try to do hard, but you know, sometimes it slips my mind. You know, you'll be in the service and all the readings, everything is old white guys. You know, and it's hard to avoid that because those are the sources you find all the time. And you're right, you know, people look for that. They want to see if they're seeing themselves, if they're hearing their voices. And if they don't, they'll walk. So in that respect, I mean, I think, you know, it sounds like the one area we may want to really look hard at is this: our congregations can take action such as the following, you know, because you know, since we're so far in the process, I would imagine nobody's really going to disagree with much of what's on, you know, the first 98 lines. You know, we all agree that corporate personhood is evil, or whatever humanists would say, you know, instead of evil.
It's only 90 to 92 that I would make an amendment for, but that's.
Yeah, so maybe we can start focusing on the actions part.
I have a friend of mine who's former boss. Last year he wrote, "Hey, I just met with Mitch McConnell. He came over here and talked with me." I said, "Hey, Mitch McConnell's never offered to talk to me." I guess it helps you that you're chief marketing officer at Altria, which is the parent company of Philip Morris.
Yep.
That's,
Well, and here we live in a country where a former coal lobbyist is being approved to be the head of the EPA. And
Right.
It's like,
Right.
okay, yeah, this is not a democracy. This is beyond a kleptocracy, or, and the word I always liked was kakistocracy, which is, a government by the inept.
Well, there's one thing too about, we talked about the structure from the very early days of the College of the Electoral College and the Senate, how all of that is really based structurally on discrimination. And the problem is that, well, we might say, well, let's get rid of this the Electoral College. Well, the thing is that the same mentality that created the college in the first place is still the group that is still in charge of things.
Absolutely.
And they would be the ones that would say yay or nay, and they're not going to say yay to a change, because that would be giving up their own power base.
And the prime example of that is our school funding. As far as I know, every state still does it the same way. They fund schools based on property taxes. Duh. Minority people tend to not be a high percentage of property owners as whites. Well, of course, that's going to perpetuate rich white school districts and poor Black and Hispanic school districts. It boggles my mind that that's never even on the table for discussion. When you bring that up, it's always like, oh, things are fine. But I'm like, no, they're not. It's like this school district gets $10,000 per student, and this one gets $2,000 per student. Where's the American dream there? Sorry, no.
And the term of structural discrimination doesn't become it doesn't become as clear unless you happen to be on those who are getting discriminated against.
Yeah. I have to find a way to stop these pop-ups on here. It's really annoying.
The League of Women Voters is one organization locally and nationally that I thought we could investigate, collaborate with. I've recently joined, but I'm not very active. It's just one more thing to try to do. And if we as a congregation were to conduct an inventory, how's our democratic process in terms of participation in the community, that might be a group we can look
They
at.
have a meeting today at 6:30, but they also have a thing tomorrow at 10.
Yes.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to see when I was serving the church in Michigan, coming from Pittsburgh, I had always been told by the League of Women Voters people there, we do not get involved in politics, period. Just end of discussion, they wouldn't do it. When I worked with the group up in Michigan, they were like, well, we will engage in a conversation about a political issue, and we will even take a stand where we feel it is anti-democratic. Now they're not going to advocate for any political, party or candidate, but they were willing to engage. And so I was like, okay, that's wow, that shocked me. So yeah, I think it would be interesting to see whether in Kentucky the League of Women Voters is willing to actually have that, at least intellectual conversation of does there need to be some kind of structural change, as long as it's kept at that level.
Right.
And that group, I know it has Dennis, but that group has really impressed me by the quality of the intellectual capability and the experience of the membership there. And it's been absolutely, when politicians go to their meetings, they are really put to the wall by that group of women. Really, so remarkable.
Yeah, and that would sort of fall under, although I'm not sure the language here says it properly. Back to that on line line 120, where it says for our congregations to partner with other UU congregations, other faith communities, nonprofits, and unions to work on democratic reforms. I don't see the League of Women Voters in that list anywhere. They're not a nonprofit. They're, I don't know what you would call them. They're not an advocacy group. What would you call the League of Women
I don't know
Voters?
if they're not a nonprofit. probably, they receive benefits, donations. I'll have to ask them tomorrow, see what their legal status is.
I guess they kind of fall in all of these things because, if a congregation is going to have a study group based on democratic reform, blah, 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 that would involve legal women voters, organized advocacy initiatives such as postcards. Now that they would not, yeah, but in Michigan, they were willing to distribute the postcards. They didn't promote them, but they would hand them, they would have them there.
Yeah.
Educational forums. Yeah, it's kind of a question, it's like, is there a way to put in there groups like...
The word that jumped out there was the word unions, because you really don't associate kind of church and it hasn't been, let's put it this way, as predominant. I'm sure way back when church is really associated more with the labor movement and what have you, but that doesn't seem to be very much a prevailing.
No, I don't think I've ever been involved in a church that had any direct dealings. I mean, is union even the right term anymore? I mean, are there other labor associations that aren't unions necessarily?
Yeah, I guess there are some organizations and associations that are missing. I mean, you think of the Sierra Club in terms of environmental advocacy. They're not a nonprofit.
Oh, really?
Well, our contributions to Sierra Club is not deductible.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Huh, that's interesting.
Because they do engage in political action.
Well, and I know the National Organization of Women is like that. There's, the ACLU is like that. There's two ACLUs.
Right.
The one that can't accept, that doesn't advocate.
Yeah, and the local chapter of Sierra Club is contributions are deductible, but not the national organization.
Even as a union, even as an organization, you can have a nonprofit that subcontracts just for for-profit.
Yeah, so that probably needs to be included. I don't see anything in here that would include those organizations. Well, maybe there's a reason they left them out, but yeah, that's a good idea.
In line 122 again, some of our members have gone to our state legislature and made appointments and tried to lobby for particular items. So even though it calls for training in 122.
Yeah, I know. I thought there was something. Direct. I thought there was something somewhere that did say that. Cluster of state legislative ministry. Oh yeah, they were dealing with the state legislative ministries, which we don't have in Kentucky. So cluster.
I think we posted bipartisan forum. Line 132.
Right.
There could be more of that. Oh, there's one. Media 136. Use a variety of advocacy tools, including meetings with legislators.
Yeah, I think that they've grouped a lot of these things under this heading, but if you don't have an active cluster or state legislative ministry, I think all of these would fall under the congregation to do.
You wouldn't see, although it's not necessarily exclusive, but a congregation per se doing a lot of that. You see a lot of members doing it. I do an awful lot with the representatives down here. They all know me because I hound them. They know me on a first-name basis because I'm always on the internet with them. But even still, I have a director of a nonprofit, of a think tank, a labor think tank, and even then you have this certain percentage of time allocated towards direct things, like
Yeah,
15%.
it's like 30 or, I know there's a number.
And I mean, you have to, if you get really heavy into that stuff, you pretty much have to define what, the time frames that you would spend for doing those types of activities.
Yeah.
Yes, I guess a lot of these things, I think we probably need to make sure that as a congregation, as a leading congregation in a state that is not necessarily that organized in the UU world for social justice, are we included in this? Is there enough here for us to do?
The other question I'd raise is, of the number of UU churches within Kentucky, how often do they get together to do that particular type of
Probably
activity?
never. I would imagine it's never happened.
No, that's.
I suppose if we here or First Church has a forum, a handful of people from the other church go, but does anyone here ever go to the church in Lexington or
Certainly nothing
Frankfurt?
across state lines or anything like that, or these, telecom communications types of things, which are always possible like this day.
Well, one thing which really doesn't have to do with this particular study action issue, but I guess I would say maybe rather than saying clusters or state legislative ministries, I'd say under congregations would be, if you don't have one, create a state legislative ministry. And now with Zoom technology, that's way easier than it used to be. Because I know the Kentucky, the reproductive choice group, they've just been going through this because up to now, almost all of their members have been from Louisville, except for a handful from Lexington. So now they're creating local groups in other places, but the only other one they've created is Lexington. So they're only beginning to structurally involve the rest of the state in their work. Whereas we could start right off the bat with, Bowling Green, Lexington, Frankfurt, and I don't even know where the other UU churches in the state are. And just have one big, we're inviting you to this, social justice, extravaganza, come and let's talk about it. Because I've now been involved in 2 states, legislative networks. And, it's one of those things, they're a great idea, they're fantastic, but oh my God, they can, how UUs are when they create anything, they wind up masticating the thing to death before they finally get it going. Whereas I think here, I don't think Kentucky would necessarily support the same kind of a legislative network that you see in Pennsylvania or California. It would be a much looser, sort of association. Wouldn't need all that structural stuff.
Well, thinking back at the presence you had in Frankfurt recently on the Poor People's Campaign,
right?
That was organized somewhat by the more progressive Ministers Association, it seems.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
What was that group called? They were amazing.
Yeah.
For anyone, for those who are watching this, Dennis and Joe and I were in Frankfurt 3 weeks ago, and I'm not remembering the name of the group. It's like Concerned Clergy or something, Council of Churches, or it was a Council of Churches, something like that.
Yes.
And I wasn't expecting anything of it because usually we're not even invited to Councils of Churches meetings. UUs got kicked out of the National Council of Churches back in the 30s. But their speakers they might as well have been Unitarian Universalists. They were right out there with social justice issues. They could have been our ministers.
Yes.
So that might be a group we just may want to plow, all our resources into that group.
On the thing of the communications, there is no the questions of some kind of a newspaper, newsletter, news things of which wouldn't have to be. I mean, there is one out in Paducah. The Catholic in Paducah. That Father Schoenis is on that board of that. But that's it comes out, I don't know, maybe once a month, once every 2 months, but it has different articles, some of which are, most of which have to do with social justice, democracy, a whole list of different things. But they get people from different parts of the state too that are into that.
I wonder if there's some way to assess the effectiveness of these various efforts. I mean, for the most part, many of these are, we're talking to ourselves, we're spinning our wheels. Nothing changes. You can write letters to Mitch McConnell, and it's just falling on deaf ears.
Who was it, Hayek, that said that there isn't even a term of social justice because it's not a measurable entity, so it doesn't exist, basically. But the question remains is that how do you know if you have some kind of an activity of this nature? How do you know what is it that you're measuring? What is it that your goals are? That you can define. Well, after 6 months, we've achieved this. We've had 3 meetings. We've discussed whatever.
Well, and Bernie, this is the $64,000 question. And I'll inject my personal point of view on this. I think when we moved as a denomination from a 1-year process to a 4-year process, it's really a perfect example of white culture, white privilege. When the thing was done within a year and people were passionate, they tended to be much stronger statements. They were like, we will advocate for the end of this, and we will march, or we will do this. When we give ourselves 3 or 4 years to write these statements, they gradually become more and more centrist. And your point is exactly right. There is nothing in these recommendations about working with Black Lives UU, working with the Poor People's Campaign. The groups that would actually, you could go, this happened because we were associated with this group and they did that.
Which goes right back to the word intersectionality.
Exactly.
Yeah, right it is. With whom?
Yeah, because even if we got all the UU churches in Kentucky together, what the hell are they going to do? But if we join with the Council of Churches, if we join, we're kind of joined with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, and we have kind of a presence with Poor People's Campaign. But if we had people from our Frankfurt Church, our Lexington Church, and our Louisville Church who were all on the steering committee of the Poor People's Campaign, and were involved in the actions, the civil disobedience actions, would it make more of a difference? I don't know. I tend to think so. And if nothing else, for me, what the Poor People's Campaign did was it gave people a very concrete example of these are the kinds of things you can do. Now, have they made fundamental changes in the system yet? No. But can they? Well, I think they're going to do a lot more than writing postcards. To me, writing postcards is one of the most. Yes, it's a 101 activist thing. It's the way you're going to first get anyone involved in doing anything because there's no risk. But to me, it's like congressmen just throw those things away. They don't pay attention to those. So how can we elevate what we do from And this is my biggest concern with all these things. They're so milquetoast.
Yeah,
it's like there's no real commitment to anything.
And the thing is, one of the things that's not mentioned there, if the problem is the power and the control and the finance, it's not even mentioned in there. Yeah. I mean, the questions of coordinating things with local bankers, with financial companies, and these sorts of things, the major factories and those things, not even mentioned, but they're the ones that make the whole system work.
Yeah.
It's not mentioned there at all. That's not even given a consideration. Because if you don't have that, all the rest of the stuff is talking around the situation because it's not making. You get a person from the manager of Ford or UPS taking a stand on something, and then you're probably going to get more action than you know, 10 churches, you know, getting together and
Yeah, I mean,
protesting.
when I was in Midland, Michigan, I literally had an editorial in the paper every 2 weeks. And it did make a difference. I mean, we got members and all that, but, you know, it's still a red town. It's still electing horrible representatives.
It's as hard as heck to get anything in it. I've had 2 editorials in this year, which is nice.
So, you know, I think the as an association actions are fine, and they need to be general, I suppose. But I guess the ones that we here are probably most concerned about is what we can do as individuals and what we can do as a congregation, because we're talking about what would TJ do. And yeah, I look at these and go, this doesn't commit us to anything. You know,
Is there anything also about, I don't even know how we would even go about it, but you know, supporting free press?
certainly under fire.
Yeah.
Is that even mentioned anywhere in here?
Well, because I feel that having a free press is even more important than a democracy.
It underpins democracy.
I don't recall even seeing it in that.
Yeah, there's no mention of free
I
press.
don't recall it being mentioned in here at all. And especially with the assassination of that Khashoggi.
Yeah, absolutely.
That one was, you know, and I think a lot of the people in the media get that was not just a shot across the bow. You know, that was just a torpedo that missed. But that was really an attempt, I think, to stifle free press completely.
And the lack of our administration's
Response.
targeted response.
Yeah,
Fake news.
Let it wear it out, let it go.
It's,
You know.
Well,
good point, Bert.
And so, you know, that gets back to the point that Joe just made. So we clearly don't have a free press in this country, you know, the way, you know, theoretically, because you've got newspapers that are owned by, you know, conservative or whatever. I haven't even read the newspaper here in this town yet to get a feel for it. But I've been in cities where the paper was owned by a conservative, and it wasn't the free press. They just put in whatever they wanted to put in. You know, if we determined that, you know, the newspaper serving our community is inadequate and not representative of a free press, what's our alternative? Is our alternative to create our own?
Doesn't Southeast Christian have its own paper?
Yeah. Well, what is you know, in Kentucky there's an online journalist thing. I get their emails. Let's see if I can find that. Where would I have that? And they're sort of a free press journalist group. Let me see if I can find that. This keeps wanting to mark the. Okay, no, it's going to. I think they send out a weekly or a bi-weekly email. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I think it's something journalist. Oh, that's it. The Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting.
Oh yeah, they just started. They started about a year or two ago. They
It's part of the Courier Journal.
yeah. No, this was the what do you call it? The radio program. What's that? NPR, National Public Radio, talks about that, and they come up when they do a fundraiser. They mention this group, but it did a lot of investigative reporting on a couple of local scandals, local scandals, and they were very. I mean, they were highly rewarded, praised for their work. So I only think it only exists for about a year, maybe
really?
two. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. It's both.
But yeah, that's a good point, Bernie. We should send in a comment, something to the effect of, where's the mention of the free press in this whole thing, and what we can do to support it.
And as a corollary to that, it's reflection groups on those particular those things, reading groups that would discuss those particular topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you could. I don't know how often there things come out. I forget, but just like we have our book group that once a month gets together and reads a book.
Mm-hmm.
Could we do once a month? Our Sunday forum would be, here's what they've sent us out this week. Let's talk about it. It'd be kind of an easy, ready-made one.
And another thing that is probably the most difficult is the sort of one-on-one engagement. Like these politicians won't respond unless they understand that there's tremendous public support.
Yeah.
And to talk to people with very different views and try to engage them, but like for me, it's almost impossible. I don't know any arch conservatives. I don't engage with them.
Well, and I detest talking to legislators. I can't be nice. I'd rather be out there marching and speaking on the Capitol steps or whatever, because I can't talk to these guys.
Well, I'm not even thinking about legislation, but to neighbors.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, I have no interest in talking to Trump supporters. I just can't do it. So
we become so polarized that this makes it real. It becomes a personal confrontation rather than a discussion.
Right.
So the last thing under the congregational action items would be adopt resolutions supporting democratic reforms and publicize it. Don't just pass the thing and aren't we good now? But yeah, we get it published. Make a big deal. What was it last? It was last November. This group of seminaries and professors and clergy, I forget, it was the National Council of something or other. They were meeting up in Boston, and they came out with this manifesto that was great. It was good, great stuff. I jumped on it. We had seminars and everything, but they never followed up. It was in the press for one day, and then it got forgotten. It's like it's not enough to just pass a resolution. You got to get out there and really push it and get it in people's faces.
Another thing that this document doesn't really address is the education of youth in terms of what democracy is and the process of it is and how to get involved. It doesn't say anything really about youth as far as I understand.
Well, and what could easily be put in here, again, the congregational would be, in our lifelong learning programs, yeah. Not only just how does democracy work, but why is it a concern of our faith? And we're the only church that says we believe in the democratic process. Well, what the hell does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And why is it a faith issue? Yeah, that's a good point, Joe.
And there are, when we talk about interacting, there are a lot of these, like Kentucky's for the Commonwealth, that are very good at doing that kind of stuff. I mean, we had an example here. I don't know if anybody was here when they had that high school a student who was talking about going door to door and confronting people. She was absolutely incredible. I mean, I thought she was a graduate student. But I mean, that's the type of to find out what kinds of groups do exist within the community, within mostly probably would be non-church types of groups, but to associate with those. With them.
Yeah.
One thing that could be added to individual efforts would be things like as little as putting up signs on your yard, or letters to the editor, to the newspaper. Maybe it might reach one or two people.
Taking a public stand, I think, takes courage, but has an influence. I'm thinking as well as about our local education system. especially looking at the news in the paper today about a student in the Catholic school system confronted a Native American in demonstration. What do we know about the civics instruction in public schools, and how does that inculcate a feeling of participating in the democratic process? I think of the organization Clout, a local organization that is a group of ministers that put substantial pressure on the school system, among others, on a variety of issues over the years. But Thomas Jefferson, Unitarian, has chosen not to be involved because of their theist orientation. They say a prayer to God at the beginning of their services.
Accepting Jesus as your Lord and Savior.
Yeah. And I would say, looking at 148, slide, it says participate in interfaith and multiracial coalitions and other social justice groups that work toward achieving democratic reforms. If our congregation wants to abide by that suggestion, I think we need to re-examine how we can participate in local organizations that have a slightly different theological orientation. And I want to make it a point that when we're thinking about not just Christian organizations, but Muslim organizations that are theistic, how can a group that is humanitarian in the majority sense, how can we make our presence known and show respect for those beliefs, but also how do we articulate our own presence too?
Yeah, when we were in Frankfurt, the speaker, I watched how he very carefully danced, and when he listed off this whole long list of social justice issues, I think he said women's rights, but he didn't say reproductive rights. And I'm like, that's going to be the one thing that that group will not agree with us on.
Yeah.
No matter how liberal a Christian church is, I don't know any Christian church that has ever taken a stand that favors the availability of abortion. Even the gay lesbian issue is going to be touchy, but they hit that one on the head. They were for it, but they're not going to promote abortion rights.
Yeah. Well, here's an attempt that I think we could, as individuals, say, is to participate in community organizations and somehow make public our principles and our belief system in a way that's not confrontational, but so that we want to be participating in collaborative efforts like that.
Yeah, and following you up on your thing, is one of the big things of the Muslim faith is really contributing to those in need.
Yes, exactly.
You know, and that would be a real. When you talk about interconnection, but most people don't even know that exists, and they have just the negative thing of the whole Muslim community.
Well, and getting to the point of democracy, now you have the fundamental difference between Sunni and Shiite. Where I always get them backwards. Shiites are the ones that believe in separation, right? And Sunnis are the ones that believe in the unity of church and state.
Shiites kind of pay more attention to Ali, and then Sunni.
Right. So there's a lot that we share with the Shiite philosophy that state is state. That's not our job. So in the one sense, we could really support that. And on the Sunni sense, we could go, hey, we got a problem with female genital mutilation and these other things you guys are promoting.
And I imagine somewhere that there must be a professional association, Muslim professional association, because you walk into any cardiology department, and they're either Hindu or this is what one of the doctors told me. He says half of us are Hindu and half of us are Muslim.
Is there a mosque in town?
Oh, gee, yes, there's 25 of them.
I mean, not to
a mosque, yes.
A mosque.
Up on Westport Road. Beautiful thing.
Because that's, what you're talking about was the way it was in Saginaw, Michigan. They had just built a mosque 5, 6, 7 years ago. Had a big open house that was fantastic. And their whole board of directors were all anesthesiologists and whatever. But they were fantastic. You know, they would answer any questions you had. They had 2 scholars at one table. You know, we will answer any question you have about Islam. You know, it was great. I thought it was a fantastic idea.
This place, I mean, it's marble. The whole place, it's amazing.
So, you know, that's
It's got a dome and everything. And you go up,
not just the
West
salon
Point
network.
Road. It's off on the
Yeah, not just the salon network, but we should be in person working with that mosque.
Yes.
Because odds are, I mean, they'll tend to be more conservative than us on some things, but odds are they're going to be fairly in line with us on a lot of things. And certainly the women there are not prohibited from driving or, you know, whatever. You know, they're not going to do that kind of thing.
Like I was talking with one woman on this thing. So, well, what do you have to do? Well, I'm an architect. Okay.
Well, you know, we're hosting the Floyd Creek Democratic Organization.
Yes, yes.
We could look to some of the area mosques that might be within that realm, geographic realm, and invite them to some of the meetings. And again, kind of reaching out, not just waiting for them to.
Yeah, it's that's a hard sell. I could, you know, I try to visit a few of those. But.
Well, and again, that gets back to the racial issues of, you know, anytime we ask you to either participate in another group's activities or ask them to participate in ours, we have to always keep in mind the risk that they're, you know, taking on that we don't even think about. You know, for us to go over to West Louisville and participate in a political meeting is nothing. Like, none of us would even think twice about, oh, I'm going to be, the police are going to stop me, or I'm going to be mugged, or whatever. So, but for them to come over here, they got to think about it. You know, Jody and I just visited friends up in Cincinnati, and it's a multiracial couple. They moved into a neighborhood that's 99% white, and the husband was followed by the police for weeks, just coming to and from work every day. They were following him until finally, as the cops came by one day when they were both outside, and the wife went out and said, I just want to introduce ourselves because we just moved to the neighborhood, and this is my husband. You know, like, stop following him. The kind of thing that would never even occur to us, but it's a daily, you know, it's in the daily thoughts of anyone, whether they're a person of color or a minority religion, you know.
I think engagement with other churches, religious organizations, issue-based, all-encompassing.
Right.
You know, engage with them on issues we agree about.
It's always going to be something
because
we disagree about.
Yeah, there's going to be
always
there are going to be things we disagree on. So
yes.
Keep it focused.
Yes.
And it might even just start with as simple as, you know, affirming a friendship with them. Like, if another 9/11 happens, we're there for you. You know, or if you know, vandalism happens, you know, call us. You know, we'll be there. That's kind of the level a lot of these churches are at.
The strange thing that happened about a year ago, I mentioned from the concerns. I said Tuesday there's going to be a protest against all of this, against the Muslims in there. And lo and behold, we had some signs here, and a Muslim that had a police car in front of it. So it was interesting that it was Thomas Jefferson and the mosque that had the police protection. Yeah, I thought it was.
Okay. So, just wondering, this is a start of the conversation. How do we advertise church-wide to get any other comments beyond the YouTube video?
Well, I'll put something in the Wednesday email, and by then I should have this video ready and off and posted. And I'll put together a draft of the suggestions we've made. I don't think we've really made any hardcore suggestions about exact wording, but we've said, hey, in this area, what about this? And that's fine, because it asks what the strengths and weaknesses are. I think we've mostly identified some weaknesses. And just ask people, you know, if they have any additional comments on top of that. I'll be surprised if you do too much, but this is going to be a slow evolution of getting people interested. And usually the more ethereal the topic, like democracy, the less people get engaged. When it's something like ethical eating, then it's like, people are right in there, but like I said, I should even look up and see what the other current study action issue is, because to be honest, I don't know. Because I know they were reviewing the process, so I don't know if.
I was looking last year. Seemed to be economic inequality as a.
Oh yeah,
study action.
I do remember that. This was another page that I had shared with the with the Justice Coordinating Council. That that we as UUs have involvement in so many different issues. The issues that sometimes we forget we even are involved in.
You go to search.
Yeah,
CSAI.
yeah, it's where's the definition page? Yeah, so at that GA they began a rethinking of the social witness process. So I'm not sure. But that's something we should probably look at, if we want to continue this process, would be getting involved in the current one too. That's interesting. Actually, a little forum, the questions. I haven't seen this before. Doesn't look like there's been too many comments though. Okay, that's that one. Oh yeah, this is okay. Undoing intersectional white supremacy. That must have been started last year. Yeah, they took a year off to do the review. So this is the current one that's undergoing the initial drafting. And this is the one we would use the study guide and actually do several workshops. Like the study guide for this one starts off with a 30-minute video. And then it's more about how do you feel about this issue, not what would you actually put, what text would you put in? Is this the way you understand things? And, do you have other, ways of looking at it and stuff like that? So I'm not sure where these things start with a congregation or a group of congregations submit the issue. So there should be text. Okay, here it is. So here's the text of the current CSAI Undoing Intersectional White Supremacy. And then there should be a study guide somewhere. Or maybe they just haven't done the study guide yet. But they have study, discussion questions. So this is something, maybe the Social Justice Committee would want to think about, would be starting to have these workshops. And, and I think these comment forms, they can be even individuals. So yeah, that's something we probably should think about putting on the social justice agenda. Because that's certainly something I'd be happy to support, doing this kind of a forum.
What's the term? Undoing intersectional.
Intersectional white supremacy.
Okay.
The other thing that just struck me, the thing is how much do we know about our local representatives, both the municipal people, but also the representatives.
Right.
I mean, it's taken me several years to get on the, hi Joe type of things with a lot of people.
Right.
But I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy. But how much do we know about even the municipal people who really do have a say in it? So that if we're proposing something, then we know who should we talk to.
And that's part of the educational piece too. If you grew up in Kentucky, you would grow up with the notion that your state legislature only meets for 3 months out of the year, and that's a very weird situation. That's the least I've ever seen. In Michigan, they're open not year round, and they take summer.
Not full-time legislators either.
But they meet during the spring and the fall, and in December they're doing the same thing Congress does. They're ramming through things in the lame duck session. They do all those kind of games. Whereas here, a student might not even think our legislators do anything or much of anything outside of January to March.
Mm-hmm.
Well, any other comments? Well, thank you guys.
Other than my thing that I wanted to add into it. And mine is on, what is it, line 90 to 92.
Oh yeah, you
and I'll
talked
give you
about
a copy of what I've written, because I'm going to send it in. I've already sent it to one person.
Okay.
But you know what? Here's my point.
Oh, that's right. You did mention this.
Yeah. Here's my point. When they make a thing about the church and whatever, heavens for a price, you're not going to find that on any official.
UUA.
No, you're not going to find it on any official Roman Catholic. That's thing. So it's an inaccurate presentation of a theological principle. So what I would do would eliminate that whole line completely, and instead put some very positive stuff about what were the benefits of the Reformation, such as open speech, freedom of press, more freedom the opening of more democratic processes.
Yeah, for a document that seems to go out of its way to not offend anybody.
Yeah,
that's a really offensive statement.
It is.
And a Christian reading that would be like, hey, what the hell? I didn't do anything to you. I wasn't part of this.
Well, and the thing is that it's reflective of the body in total, rather than what's his name, Tinsley, or what was the guy that basically what that was they were trying to build up the Vatican, and they needed money for the Vatican. So
and we got to be careful of our own glass house. Unitarian and Universalist churches sold pews too, back in the day when all the churches were doing it. So let's not be too self-righteous here.
But I was saying, if they wanted to get them, well, we've got the Holy Inquisition, we've got the Crusades, we've got the domination of the New World. If they want to hit the Catholics for something, and they can always go back to the Trinity, because the Trinity was imposed by the Roman Emperor. So to put it in its place, eliminate that one sentence, and in place put what were the positive effects on the democratic effects of the Reformation on the whole issue of democracy.
Yeah, because I think the point they're trying to make, line 90 is great. Our religious movement came out of the Protestant Reformation and its movement to America, basically. But it wasn't about the second. Martin Luther's thing was about the Pope. It wasn't our thing.
Yeah.
Our thing was about anti-Trinitarianism, which has nothing to do with the Catholic Church, per se. So it's almost like 991 is just really unnecessarily snarky.
It contrasts so much with the rest of the document.
Yeah, I agree.
maybe it should just be eliminated, those 300.
Yeah, I think so too. It's trying to draw a conclusion that one doesn't need to be drawn, and two is kind of questionable. You know, are you really going to compare corruption in the church to corruption in politics? Then you might as well just say, well, all human endeavors are inherently corrupt. You know, this one's just gotten more so, and we now want to do something about it. Okay, well, thank you all for being here, and
Thank you.
hopefully this will be the beginning of other activities like this.
Good.